Welcome back to Passion About Music Education, a channel dedicated to you, the music educator. Hi, I'm Rachel Hardman. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to incorporate creativity into your classroom when you find yourself in a situation with limited or no resources. I was reading a post the other day and a music teacher was asking how could she meet the creativity criteria of the standards that she was teaching when all she had was Chromebooks. She said that she enjoyed working with the technology, but that she didn't want to use it all the time. Because truthfully, if you're honest, our students love computers, but they also don't want to be on them all the time in every single lesson. Because when they come to you, they may have already been on a sort of device for 4 or 5 of those previous lessons. So how do we ensure that we're meeting the creativity component aspect of the curriculum and not always reliant on software, especially if we find ourselves in a situation where we have almost no resources? It still saddens me that teachers are in a position where they're not in a facility that has the equipment for them to be able to do the job that they've been asked to do. You wouldn't ask an English teacher to not have any novels to teach from. You wouldn't ask a science teacher to never have any chemicals or Bunsen burners in their room. So just thinking that Chromebooks is enough for a music educator to meet all the criteria of the curriculum is just not good enough. And if you find yourself in that situation, don't be afraid to ask for resources. Even if the first time you ask, your principal says no. You have to keep a system for the benefit of your students and also for your own teaching, the variety of the curriculum, to make music interesting and accessible for all of our students. I know that I've been in a situation where I've arrived at schools and generally the department has needed more resources or hasn't got many resources at all, and you do have to keep being persistent. My advice, if you find yourself in that position, write down your wish list, price it up, get a quote, then go present that to your line manager, to the leaders of the school, and keep repeating it until you get what you need. I went to a school and I found that my staff were all using their own resources, their own exercise music teaching resources. The school doesn't have any for the next teacher that arrives or for that continuity and consistency. Although he grumbled about spending, a couple of $1,000s, I think it was at the time, on music for, I think there was about 6 staff, he did find the money. So don't be fooled when they say they have no money. Schools have money and they can find it. You just have to be persistent enough to ensure that you get a share of that for your students. All of the suggestions I'm going to share, I've tried myself in the classroom over the years. Some of them will work brilliantly for your situation and some won't work at all. That's okay. It's often a trial and error, see what your students like. If we look at rhythm first, which is kind of the obvious topic to cover without any instruments, because of the fact that you can do clapping and you can do body percussion, you can use the tables and the chairs. It's quite easy to do rhythmic activities. So here are a few suggestions. 1, create a pack of rhythm cards with different beat values. Give each group of students a pack. They create their own 4-bar rhythm, and they line them up on the table, they put them in order. They learn to clap them. They can move them all around. They have to then stand up and perform them. Then they swap stations and go to another groups. So you kind of rotate your students around so that everybody gets to perform each other's compositions. You can turn it into a class composition where you have one group start and then the B and then the C and then the D, and you could do it as a round. You could also turn it into ostinato patterns so that you build it up as layers, and you could have student conductors leading each group and pointing at the group and taking groups out. It's a really great way to introduce other elements such as dynamics and tempo. Talk about how to clap quietly, how to create some interest, especially when you're doing ostinato patterns and they're quite repetitive. How do we make them interesting to the listener, but also to perform? So this is looking at how to create rhythms. You could look at body percussion, how to take that rhythm pattern that they've created and take it to the next stage by adding different timbres, by clapping, by stamping, by tapping their legs. you tapping on the table. And then if you want to take it on to the next step, you can of course bring in time signatures. Most of the time you'll probably do that pattern in 4/4, but you could look at 3/4, you could look at the dotted rhythms of 6/8 or 12/8 or irregular rhythms. Of course, then it leads into lots of listening work and showing examples within the class of compositions that use these techniques. Minimalistic compositions is a really great example of how they use ostinatos and layers, and this is a great way to bring students into understanding how they're doing that, also on a creative element within the classroom. And for maybe your more advanced students, and depending on how comfortable you feel with this, you can start looking at rhythm patterns and rhythm work of different genres and different styles. So you could look at the rhythms of salsa and samba, world music, and obviously pop music and jazz. The next theme is really looking at notation, and here's a few ideas for how to be creative with notation in your classroom that steps away from technology. I've always really enjoyed teaching graphic skills to students, particularly when you've got limited resources, because it's a really great way for them to think creatively about how to make sound, what does sound look like. It also is really good if your students aren't yet comfortable with stave notation and how to notate their music accurately. How can we also notate music to represent the sound? Looking at obviously nonsense words, sound effects, obviously body sounds, clapping, tapping. How do they bring that into a graphic score? I really like showing the Cafe Barber Stripsodity graphic score, because it's so different to what the students would listen to at home. It's quirky and funny, and it's a beautiful example of graphic notation. And then the students obviously have a go at doing their own. Again, once they've completed and created their graphic score and performed it, the task is then to give it to another group for them to perform, so they will switch around, and then students can have a discussion about what was easy to do off that graphic score, what was hard, what were the challenges, so that they really understand about how to develop your initial idea into a final polished composition, which is part of that creative journey. It's us reviewing what works and what doesn't work, so we improve. So there's that kind of task where you're switching it around for students to try other people's work is a really great way of getting them to think and analyse about what they're performing, what they're creating, and how they're explaining their ideas. Also leads into a discussion about world music and how that many cultures are sharing their music not via standard stave notation. How do we share music? How do we keep that tradition going? And also again, how we look at our classical musicians, particularly of the 20th century, how they're notating. I mean, again, John Cage's prepared piano, he literally graphically scores down every string with all the nuts and bolts, has a very clear plan. Is that easy then to copy when you're potentially going to play that piece yourself? This opens up the world of music in a different way to our students by doing these tasks. And the last area, of course, is using the voice within our creative activities. Depending on how creative your students are and confident that they are in singing in front of their classmates, you could get them to work on a radio jingle or a TV ad, catchy tune. The students always like that, so they're promoting a brand new product. You could do an exercise on creating a soundscape, so maybe something with, like, I don't know, they're in a forest, or they're out in nature, or they're in a spooky, scary movie. What sound effects would they create? How would they do that? How would they build up the tension? That's also a great one for if you want to link technology with live music, so that they record some sound effects to go underneath it, and then they do vocals over the top of it. So it's a great way of using technology in live performance. Steve Reich does this with his different trains. If you show them that piece, you'll hear recordings from the train journey and all the vocals, and then the string quartet will play live alongside that recording. Another composing idea for you that I've used in the classroom is taking a set of poems and giving them to students. They pick the poem and then they have to turn it into a performance. So they could sing, they could rap, they could speak it and have sound effects. You know, they can be really creative of how they deliver that poem. And again, of course, you could do that with an existing song. They rewrite the lyrics, they just kind of arrange it into different sounds and a different style. Obviously it'll be much more acoustic. They could add harmony if they, maybe in a choral program and know how to do that. Or they could take the lyrics and perform those with a completely different accompaniment off of their piece of technology. So again, you're using technology and live performance and how that works, because that's obviously a different creative skill. How do we create something that works and synchronizes with technology and live performance, and how does that work? These are great questions for the students to explore. Now, the work might not be masterpieces, but the idea that they are really thinking about composing skills, creativity. How do we as musicians make music, edit music, improve our music, think about performance venues and how a piece of music that we create will sound different in different venues is a great way of really getting our students to be super creative. Of course, alongside of that, I would bring into my classroom. Alongside all of that, of course, I would bring in listening examples so they could see this and watch this, like definitely using YouTube resources, so that they can see that actually what they're trying to create and experiment with, people are doing professionally out in the real world and making a living as composers and creators of live music. So if you find yourself in a situation where you are teaching classroom music with almost no resources and you're trying to think about how to bring in creativity and composing into your program, I really hope a few of these ideas help and will give you some starting points to support your students. If you have any great projects that you've done with your students that work, don't forget to leave them in the comments below to share with our wonderful community here over on Passionate About Music Education. And I look forward to seeing you again here on the channel very soon.